We're going to continue our discussion on how to describe data. In the last two sections, we looked at how we could visually display data if it clustered together, if there was grouping, how we could use geometry to augment our understanding of what our data was doing. Currently, what we're going to do here is we're going to look for how we can talk about the center of data. And there's going to be some different ways we talk about where the center of data is. And so what we're going to try to do is we're going to find three measures, mean, median, and mode. We will look at this with populations and samples. We'll look at the concept of a weighted mean of a data set and how to estimate the sample from group data. When we mean group data, things that were already in frequency distribution so that we don't have all of the individual data elements. We'll also develop some definitions on how we can describe the shapes of data, and we'll learn, and those shapes will have different meanings with the mean and median and how they are related. So the measure of central tendency, we're looking for a value that represents a typical or central entry of a data set. And the most common ways we do this are the mean, median, and mode. The mean being the average, the median being the middle, and the mode being the most frequent piece of data. And they work on different things. The mean works on the values. The median works with the number of pieces of data and the middle relative to it. And the mode looks for the most value. So the place where one value comes up the most. And so they're all slightly different ways of looking for clumping or an idea of center, because we think the center describes the truth of what we are looking at. And we'll learn more and more how that's not a bad approximation, or it's not a bad way to think. All right, so the mean is also called the average, and it's the sum of all the data entries divided by the number of entries. This uses sigma notation. Now, the sigma is a capital sigma. It's the thing that looks like an E. It's the same as kind of similar pronunciation function to Greek is the letter S. And so sigma means the sum. And so this says the sum of all x's, or you add all the data entries that are within your variable x. The population we will talk about with a Greek mu, mu for mean. And so the mean is the sum of all the data divided by the number of pieces of data. And the sample mean will use x bar, and x bar is the sum of all the data divided by the number of samples. Notice we use a capital N to talk about the population number of data entries because this says we have all of them, so it's kind of capitalized. Where a sample is, we took some from the larger thing, and so it's lowercase. So let's look at finding a sample mean. So I'm going to come over to my blackboard here, and we're going to write down these pieces of data. Let's see here, 274. Let's come over here and get this positioned properly. There we go. So let's say we have 274, 235, 223, 268. And what are my other pieces of data? 290, 285, 235. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is a sample from a weight loss study. So we have 7 pieces in our sample. And so being a sample, my mean is represented by x bar. And I'll have the sum of all the pieces of data. Now I tend to use an index I because sometimes I want to know if I have the first, second, or third piece of data, and I can denote that by numbers in a subscript here. So you'll see I differ from the book in how I write this sometimes. And so what this expands out to is it says add up all the pieces of data. and divide. Oh, my division line's going a bit odd here. Need to slant my page a bit on my tablet. Here we go. And divide by 7. And this is approximately, if we plug this into our calculator here, this is approximately 258.6. So our sigma notation says sum out all our pieces of data and divide by the number of things we have. Well, 7 pieces of data is still a little long. It takes me a while to enter in the calculator, and good data sets can have more values than that. So let's look at how we can get our technology to help us here. So I'm going to come over to Excel, and I've already went in and I've created a new blank workbook. And we'll look at the components of Excel. So each of these things are called cells, and they are identified in a grid. We have columns out with letters attached to them and rows with numbers attached to them. And this cell is in column C, row 3, so we would refer to it as C3. I tend to leave my first row and my first column open for labels. And so these were weights that we had, and I'm going to bring over all the weights. So let's see, I have 274, 235. So 274 tab, 235 tab, 223, 268, 290, 285. 285, and 235. Now, there's a couple things we can do before I start doing calculations on it. If I click on column B and go to data, I have these options to sort. And this says A to Z, lowest to highest, and Z to A, highest to lowest. So I'm going to sort it downwards. So it starts with the lowest number and goes up to the highest. Also, if I have a large amount of data, I can get my count for me. So I can figure out how large n is. And this would be my first calculation. So I put a label here for n. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the equal sign. And I'm going to type in the command. Well, I want to count all my pieces of data. So I'm going to go count. And I'm going to choose column B. So I do this by typing in B2, which grabs my first piece of data. Then I'm going to put a colon in, and B8, which grabs my last piece of data. And I hit tab, and it tells me there's 7 pieces of data in there. Next, to find the mean, which is the calculation we want to do, or that we were just doing, I'm going to say equal. And I'm going to type in average. And again, I'm going to choose. Notice I can also choose with my mouse. I can click on the first cell, and I can work. And once I have my first cell, I can hold the Shift key and click on the last cell. And there's my average, or my mean value. And so Excel is going to be the best, one of the better calculators that we can have here. And so I was able to find the number of things and the mean with the calculation. And so equal average, the first cell to the last cell in a column of data. All right, if we continue on, we can look at the median. Now, the median is in the middle of the data when the data is in an ordered list. We can think of it as if the data is sitting on a number line, and we want to find the middle in which the data sits, so that there's an equal amount of parts of data before and after. And let's look at this. Now, this is going to differ between if it's even or odd, but let's go back here with our data set and look at what the median looks like. So what I'm going to do is that this has to be in order. Now, I know in Excel I pre-ordered it, but let's get a visualization of this here. So let's reorder our data. The lowest number was 223. Then I had 235 twice. Okay. My next number was 268. Then I had 274. Then I had 285 and 290. So I have an ordered list of data, goes from lowest to highest. Now there's 7 pieces of data, so if I divide it in half, the middle is going to sit around 3. I can think of it as if I come up 3 and I go back 3, that's in the middle. And so if I were at 268 and looking forward, there's 3 pieces of data. And if I were at 268 looking backwards, there's 3 pieces of data. So the median is the data point in which there's equal amounts of data on either side. And so the median for this data set is 268. And let's go back over and see if Excel can do it for us. So I have my data listed here. So I'm going to put in a space for median. I'm going to come over and I'm going to type in the command equal. And I'm going to do median again. And my data was cell B2, colon, B8. And Excel automatically finds this. Remember, we're working with 7 pieces of data here. This isn't too bad. But some of these calculations and finding the median could be quite arduous, especially if we're dealing with a couple hundred, couple thousand pieces of data. So getting comfortable with entering these commands in Excel and getting the answers out of it will help us deal with large data sets. Now, going back to the visual representation here, it was, with this being an odd number of pieces of data, a particular value sat in the middle, but something different happens when we get to even pieces of data. So let's say this person didn't want to participate in the study. And so we now have 6 pieces of data instead of 7. Well, if I go 3 in on this side, right, because 6 divided by 2 is 3, I come to here, and if I come 3 pieces of data this way, I end up in between these two values. So somewhere in between these two values sits a point where there's 3 pieces of data ahead and 3 pieces of data behind. And the best way to describe that is the midpoint. So we take 235 plus 268 and we divide by 2. So that's what, 3, carry my 1, 0, carry my 1, 503 divided by 2. So 2 goes into 50, 251.5. And so the median for this data set is 251.5. And it puts it right in the middle for us. So median talks about a point in the data where there are equal number of data before and after, where the mean talks about the value that lies in the middle, or the average value of it. Well, now we want to talk about the mode. Sorry, we just went through those. So the mode is the data entry that occurs with the greatest frequency. If no entry is repeated, the data set has no mode. And if more than one entry has greatest frequency, then we'll say it's bimodal. And so in the data that we had, we should have noted, or we can note, that 235 is repeated twice. And so for this data, the mode is 235. In fact, we can kind of sum up this original data set. Whoops, I hit the wrong button there. Let me move things back. There we go. We can describe this original data set as having a mean of 258.6, a median of 268, and a mode, the piece of data that was repeated the most, is 235. And this gives us some understanding of the shape or behavior of the data. And we'll work on defining that in full detail. Well, I'm hoping that Excel has the ability to do this. If you've noticed, each one of these functions, I'm looking at an Excel calculation. And so we could say that the mode, and we'll come here, and so far we've been really lucky. We have average for mean, which is the command we use. We have median for median. We had count for counting things. So I'm hoping if I type in mode, I get an option. And so I do. Mode from B2 to B8. And the value that is repeated the most is 235. We can also look at multimodal data, and Excel has the ability to work with that. Let's say 274 replaces 285 here. What we can do is, if we expect multiple modes to come out, we can select multiple cells of data. So notice I'm leaving room for 4 modes. And if I come up here, I can say equal mode.multi. And we're going to B2 to B8. But because I need to enter into multiple cells here, I need to tell Excel I'm doing that. So I hold Control, Shift, and Enter, and it lists all the answers. And so there were 2 modes, so it spits out 2. And then for the third and fourth, because there wasn't an extra mode, it doesn't put anything in there. And so I could remove this information as being unnecessary. So we have the ability to add multiple mode information into our data calculations. Just note that when you're doing multi, you have to select the multiple cells to use, and then when you put the function into Excel, you have to hit Control, Shift, Enter. And let me come back here. Looks like I deleted my way into a weird space here. All right, so let's remove that. There we go. And coming back. So again, I select, since I have 2 modes, I'm going to select 2 cells here. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to equal mode.mult for multi, B2 to B8. But to get my output, Control, Shift, Enter, and I get my multiple modes. So we have the ability to see multiple modes, but we do have to leave space for that to happen. All right, I'm going to pause I'm going to stop this part of the lecture here, and I'm going to continue the rest of section 2.3 as we look at what mode mean, median, and mode mean, now that we've seen how to calculate them both by hand and with technology.